McDonald's is a restaurant that is famous for serving hamburgers, fries, milkshakes, and other signature sandwiches that has made the fast food chain an icon since its creation in 1948. There are over 38,000 McDonald's restaurants in over 100 countries worldwide. McDonald's takes on the task of serving 69 million people around the world daily. And since the restaurant's existence, 1 out of every 8 Americans have worked at a McDonald's. The history of McDonald's, it starts in the early 1900s with 2 brothers, Maurice, also known as Mac McDonald, born November 26, 1902, and Richard McDonald, as most people called him Dick McDonald, born February 16, 1909, to Patrick and Marguerite McDonald. Along with their parents and their 3 sisters, Mac and Dick McDonald were part of a poor family of Irish immigrants who found a place to settle in rural New Hampshire. Their father, Patrick, who worked in a shoe factory, worked in the factory for 42 years until he was laid off with no pension, which led to the McDonald brothers realizing that their area in New Hampshire didn't have much for them that would make a decent living or a great life. The McDonald brothers at a very early age focused on being millionaires. Richard McDonald, at 8 years old, determined to be rich, told his father that he was going to be a millionaire. 1926, with the help of a distant relative working in Hollywood, California at the time, Mac McDonald then decided to pack his bags and head west. The distant relative had connections with the booming movie industry and said he could hook the brothers up with jobs. Dick McDonald, after graduating high school in 1927, also moved to Hollywood to be with his brother and work on their dreams. Now living in Hollywood, the freshly implanted New Hampshire brothers worked as handymen, truck drivers, and set movers at Columbia Movie Studios on sets of various silent films at the time. They realized after getting paid $25 a week that it wasn't going to be enough to become the millionaires that they dreamed of being, and the fact that there was no future in the work that the brothers were doing as well, they decided to save as much money as they could and find a way to still stay in the movie business. Even though they were trying to save money, the McDonald brothers were still pretty much flat broke. And in 1930, they were hearing talks from other people in the film industry, and what these people were talking about was a ran-down movie theater about 20 miles outside of Los Angeles, California, called Mission Theater. With the combination of slow business and hardly making a profit, if any at all, the owner of the Mission Theater wanted to be out on the lease. So the brothers approached the owner of the Mission Theater and they said, "Look, we don't have any money, but we will take on the lease, and if we happen to make money later on down the road, we'll sit down and we'll figure out a deal." And so that's how the McDonald brothers wound up running a movie theater. The Mission Theater had the capacity to seat 750 moviegoers, and the brothers also installed a snack bar as well. In 1931, the McDonald brothers then opened up the theater with a new name, The Beacon. As the Beacon opened up in the first couple years of the Great Depression that was due to the major stock market crash of 1929, business was slow, and it was just enough to keep things operating throughout the early to mid-1930s. With the brothers putting all of their money into the theater and not too much of any profit coming from it, they were always behind on monthly bills to keep the theater running. In extreme times, with the fears that the theater was going to be foreclosed on, the brothers buried their silver in the backyard. Since this was in the middle of the Great Depression, a lot of the other area businesses around the Beacon Theater weren't making that much money either. The brothers noticed, though, when they'd opened up the front doors to the theater and looked outside, they saw that this root beer and hot dog stand on the corner was getting a lot of customers all the time. So after 7 years of running a movie theater, the McDonald brothers saw that food sold a lot more than movie tickets. So the Beacon Theater was sold off, and the McDonald brothers used the money from the sale of the Beacon to set their sights into getting into the food business. In 1937, the brothers at this time then opened a food stand called the Air Dome. It was an octagon-shaped food stand near the Monrovia Airport along Route 66. Hot dogs were the first things that were sold at the Air Dome, and then later hamburgers were added at the cost of 10 cents each, along with all-you-could-drink orange juice for 5 cents. Now, why all-you-can-drink orange juice? Well, they lived in an orange grove town, and there's an ample supply of oranges, so they had enough oranges to be able to supply all-you-could-drink orange juice. Being located in a town where the biggest appeal of the town was the racetrack, the brothers made quite a lot of business during the racing season, but as soon as the season was over, business got really slow. In 1940, due to the slow season being a factor, the McDonald brothers wanted to get away from their current location and move somewhere else, but they needed the money. So they looked to a bunch of different banks to try to get loans here and there, and almost every bank denied them except the Bank of America, which then granted the McDonald brothers $5,000. So with the $5,000 loan in hand, the two brothers moved the entire food stand 45 miles east to a working class town with a population of 100,000 called San Bernardino, California. And with this move came a huge overhaul of the menu with a total of 25 items, which was made of mostly barbecue and also a new name, turning the food stand's name from the Air Dome to McDonald's Barbecue. The McDonald brothers didn't know anything about making barbecue, but after a few days of someone showing them the ropes of working a barbecue pit, they were set and they were on their way. Now at this period in time, drive-ins were a huge thing, very, very popular, and so McDonald's Barbecue was set on a corner lot with drive-in service. So at this point, this is when things started booming for the McDonald brothers, as they were making $40,000 a year from McDonald's Barbecue. That's roughly about $700,000 in today's money. Now, there are two demographics of customers who usually frequented a drive-in. There were the teenagers to the young men in their 20s who were only there to flirt with the younger women who worked as car hops. And then there were also the working class families just wanting a cheap meal. And the McDonald brothers saw that the young working families were more of what they wanted to serve, more than the rowdy teenagers that were just there wasting time. A fun little fact about the McDonald's Barbecue Drive-In is that the old uniforms from the Beacon Theater were reused by the car hops to wear while they were working. Even though the car hop business was a success, the McDonald brothers wanted to see more growth and were making plans for remodeling the business. As World War II ended, and in America approaching a new age based on how fast things could be serviced or food could be prepared, they realized they needed a quicker way to serve food. The brothers looked at the car hops and they saw them as slow and unreliable, and they spent a lot of time flirting with the customers in order to get larger tips. They also looked at the menu and tallied up what sold the most, and what they realized from all of the barbecue sandwiches and everything else, it was the hamburgers that made the large part of the sales. So based on the large number of sales and how hamburgers were easily able to cook and make, they laid out their ideas and in October of 1948 closed down their drive-in to redesign this new version of the restaurant. Looking for full efficiency, they looked at how the Ford Model T was built with the Ford assembly line and turned their kitchen and cooking area to much like an assembly line. While construction and renovations were underway, the sign out front of the San Bernardino location read, "Closed for alterations. The first one in America. The Drive-In Hamburger Bar. Owned and operated by McDonald Brothers." Dropping the word barbecue from their name, and now simply going by McDonald's, On December 12, 1948, the first McDonald's reopened to a fully new and redesigned look and feel. They dropped most of their menu items for a more simple menu, and this original menu consisted of 6 items: hamburgers, cheeseburgers, potato chips, coffee, soft drinks, and apple pie. The 20 car hops were eliminated, which meant no waiting staff, and orders were taken and food was served at the counter, as there were self-serve areas with condiments and napkins, and trash cans where customers could dispose of their own trash. Much like the past food stands the McDonald brothers had, this one also had no dining area and relied on the people driving up, getting out, and ordering from the counter. Along with all of these designs also came a mascot, a chubby man with a hamburger head with a chef's hat, and his name was Speedy, to represent the restaurant's quick service. As these redesigns and cuts happened, this made McDonald's able to sell their burgers for half as much as any other restaurant. A lot of people around this time thought the McDonald brothers were crazy for switching up their whole design of their restaurant. And at first, the customers really weren't that happy about the new restaurant. They would drive up, honk their horns and flash their lights, waiting for a car hop to come out, and then they just leave when they realized no one was going to come out. The first month of business for McDonald's was pitiful. It was just sad. It got so bad that they would have employees park their cars in front of the McDonald's to give it the look that there was a lot of people eating there and business was booming. The first couple months, with all their tactics to try to draw people in, it still failed. The brothers started talking to each other and said, hey, you know what, maybe this ain't gonna work out. Maybe let's just go back to barbecue in the drive-in. But as fate would have it, they decided to keep going with this idea. After about 3 months of being in business, they started to collect a few customers here and there. These consisted of cab drivers, sales clerks, and construction workers. And they liked eating at McDonald's because they loved the quickness and they could get their food and not have to wait so long while they're on their lunch break from their jobs. There was another factor that started making McDonald's take off, is that the younger customers, the kids and teenagers, thought it was a neat idea to be able to order food themselves and get their order and carry their trays of food around and do things for themselves. All this slow but gradual collection of customers, it became a massive hit in the area to the point where the McDonald brothers were pulling in $100,000 a year. And so we're at 1949, and potato chips on the menu are now replaced with French fries, and apple pies are now replaced with milkshakes. Instead of food taking 20 minutes to be served on, say, a lunch break or dinner, it took only 1 minute instead. 1952, McDonald's was featured in American Restaurant magazine with a picture of the restaurant stating, quote, "The most revolutionary development in the restaurant industry in the past 50 years. With this article in the magazine, people from all over the United States came to try out McDonald's. The McDonald brothers realized that the old octagon-shaped food stand was needing a special, unique look. Dick McDonald was looking at different shapes of buildings that other food stands had, and he really wasn't satisfied. He saw most of them as scrawny and small. And when he looked at the house he lived in with the big columns in the front, he drew up an idea of the restaurant with 4 columns, and then he said, that looks terrible. And then he made one with an arch going parallel with the building, and then he realized, hey, that didn't look too bad. And then he drew 2 arches running along each side of the building, and then he realized that that look gave the building a lot of flair. After interviewing at least 4 different architects together, the brothers hired Stanley Clark Meston to work together to design a new building for McDonald's. Meston, with his assistant Charles Fish, found various ways to improve efficiency. They even drew out the exact measurements of every single piece of equipment they had in the kitchen, in the tennis court in the backyard of the McDonald brothers' house. Besides the improvements, they gave McDonald's a more unique look compared to the other restaurants, as it had red and white tile, along with stainless steel, colorful sheet metal, large panes of glass, white, red, yellow, and green neon lights that pulsed, and most of all, two 25-foot yellow arches made of sheet metal with neon trim. And even during the early stages of design, they called these two arches the Golden Arches. During the process of looking at how faster burgers could be made, the brothers looked at which condiments were used the most. As workers making the burgers at the time were using a wooden spoon to put condiments on 3 or 4 burgers at a time, it was a problem and Dick McDonald needed to find a way to solve it. So, as a kid, he remembered having peppermint patties and realized how every single peppermint patty had the same amount every single time. So he went to a candy factory posing as a writer, saying he was going to do a story about the candy factory to figure this out. A woman at the candy factory took him to a marble table where they made peppermint patties and showed Dick this metal cone with a hole at the bottom with a stick inside, that whenever you'd lift the stick for a certain amount of time, that was the way everything came out evenly. Dick McDonald knew that this was the key for the mustard and ketchup being added to the burgers. He then came back and asked a machinist that did experimental work for the McDonald brothers if he could find a way to make a funnel that would give the right amount each time, because if the stick was lifted too much, there'd be more. The same as if it was lifted less, which in turn would give less of the condiment. So he figured the best way was to make a trigger to make the condiment dispenser give the right amount every time. Still, as Richard McDonald's dream of becoming a millionaire by 50 years old was still a bit off, they started getting into franchising the Golden Arch design and the system. By May 1953, Neil Fox, who owned a string of gas stations up and down the coast of California, he became the first franchisee, opening his McDonald's with the Golden Arches design in Phoenix, Arizona. Later, a second franchisee was from Neil Fox's brother-in-law, Roger Williams and Bud Landon. Williams and Landon opened their McDonald's August 18, 1953 in Downey, California. This location is known as the oldest surviving McDonald's, as it stayed true to its original look and it's never had to comply with any changes from the McDonald's Corporation created by Ray Kroc, because this was franchised out by the McDonald brothers. So they were under a totally different contract, so this is the oldest authentic looking McDonald's from back in the day. As they knew their restaurant was going to be big, they wanted to quit franchising and build McDonald's restaurants up and down the coast of California. But after looking at this non-franchise way of doing things, the brothers realized that they would have to take care of all of these restaurants themselves, and it'd be a lot more trouble than it was worth. The brothers then hired a franchise agent, Bill Tansey, and he sold 21 franchises, and from these franchise sales, 9 more McDonald's restaurants opened. But then Bill ran into some health problems and had to pull out of helping McDonald's. Now, as many people who have any amount of an idea of who Ray Kroc is, you know we really can't tell the history of McDonald's unless he is brought into the picture. So, at this point, Ray Kroc, he was the exclusive salesman of the multi-mixer. And the multi-mixer is a milkshake mixer that can mix 5 milkshakes at once. So as he noticed in his sales that McDonald's had ordered 8 multi-mixers for one restaurant, he flew out to visit the McDonald's to see how they were running things. And he was truly impressed. So now we're going to dig into Ray Kroc's life and give a brief but really not so brief history of Ray Kroc from his beginnings to where he was in life at this point. And from here on out, McDonald's will then skyrocket into what it is today, all because of Ray Kroc.